She thought she was traveling 1,000 miles for a new husband and a new life. She was wrong. She was traveling into a trap, and the only person who could save her was the man she was delivered to by mistake. Her name was Clara Whitfield, and her journey started on a stagecoach that rattled like a box of old bones. For 3 days, she'd watched the world she knew disappear behind her, the green hills of Missouri swallowed by the endless, golden prairie of Wyoming. Every bump and lurch of the coach was a reminder that there was no going back. In her bag, she carried a letter. The paper was soft and worn, folded and refolded so many times the creases were about to give way. She didn't need to read it. The words were burned into her memory. Samuel Morrison seeks hard-working woman for matrimony, ranch established, children welcome. The words were cold, practical, a business transaction. But Clara wasn't a girl with fanciful notions anymore. At 24, an orphan with no family and $2 to her name, she needed stability more than she needed poetry. This letter was a lifeline. It was a promise of a home, of a future, of a place to finally belong. There was only one problem. Something felt wrong. It started with the driver, a grizzled man with eyes that didn't miss a thing. He'd barely spoken a word to her, but she caught him watching her in the reflection of the dusty window. His gaze wasn't curious. It was watchful, like he was guarding a valuable piece of cargo. Then there was the widow, an old woman in black who'd gotten on at the last station. She hadn't said a word, just stared out at the horizon, her fingers clutching a worn Bible. But every time Clara looked at her, the old woman's eyes would dart away, a flicker of something that looked like pity, or maybe fear in their depths. "How much farther to Cedar Ridge?" Clara asked the driver when they stopped to water the horses. He spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. "Another day, maybe more." He squinted at the sky, where dark clouds were gathering like bruises on the horizon. "Storm's coming." He said it like a promise, or a threat. Clara's anxiety spiked. Her money was almost gone. A delay was the last thing she needed. This marriage to Samuel Morrison had to work. It was her only chance. As the coach started moving again, faster this time, the widow finally spoke. Her voice was like dry leaves rustling. "First time west, dear?" "Yes, ma'am," Clara said, trying to smile. "I'm to be married." The old woman's eyes locked onto hers. "The frontier takes as much as it gives," she whispered, her voice urgent. "Remember that, and remember that some men build their kingdoms on broken promises." Before Clara could ask what she meant, the sky tore open. Rain hammered the roof of the coach like a drumroll of doom. The trail turned to a river of mud in minutes. The driver cursed, whipping the horses into a terrified gallop. Lightning split the sky, and in the blinding flash, Clara saw the widow's face, pale and taut with fear. Then came a sickening lurch, a sharp crack, like a bone snapping. "Axel's gone!" the driver shouted over the storm. "Have to stop at the next shelter!" Through the rain-streaked window, Clara saw it, a few buildings huddled together in the gloom. It wasn't a town, it was just a place, a lonely trading post in the middle of nowhere. The coach limped toward it, and as they pulled up, Clara felt a cold dread wash over her. This wasn't just a breakdown. This felt like a detour, a deliberate one. The proprietor of the trading post was a thin, weaselly man who seemed to be expecting them. "Axle like that'll take 2-3 days to fix," he said, barely glancing at the damage. "You'll have to wait out the storm." 3 days. Her funds would be gone. Her reputation would be in question. What would Samuel Morrison think? Would he assume she'd changed her mind? The thought sent a wave of panic through her. That night, sleeping on the hard floor of the trading post, Clara listened to the wind howl and the widow pray in urgent whispers. The driver and the proprietor shared a bottle of whiskey in the corner, their low murmurs lost in the storm. But once, when the wind died down for a moment, Clara heard the proprietor say something that made her blood run cold. "Is she the one? The one for Morrison?" The driver grunted. "She's the one on my manifest. That's all I know." Clara lay frozen in the darkness. Her journey, the letter, the breakdown. It was all a lie. She wasn't a bride traveling to her future. She was cargo, and she was being delivered. The storm passed, and after 3 long days of anxiety, the coach was finally repaired. The widow was gone. She'd hired a private wagon, she said, heading north. As she left, she pressed a small, cold object into Clara's hand. For protection, she whispered, and was gone. Clara opened her palm. It was a single, heavy bullet. The rest of the journey was a blur of dust and dread. The driver was even more silent than before. Clara clutched the bullet in her pocket, the weight of it a constant, terrifying reminder. Finally, the driver pulled the coach to a halt. "Whispering Creek Ranch," he announced. Clara's heart hammered. She checked the letter again. Sunrise Valley Ranch. Outside Cedar Ridge. This wasn't it. "There must be a mistake," she said, her voice shaking. "I'm expected at Sunrise Valley." "Manifest says Whispering Creek for Miss Clara Whitfield," the driver said, already unloading her single bag. "This is the end of the line for you." A man was walking toward them from a weathered barn. He was tall, dressed in work clothes, his face shadowed by his hat. As he got closer, she could see he was younger than she'd expected Samuel Morrison to be, with dark hair and eyes the color of a stormy sky. His face was a mask of confusion. "You can't just leave me here," Clara pleaded with the driver, her voice rising in panic. "Sorry, miss," the driver said, climbing back onto his seat. He wasn't sorry at all. "My orders are fulfilled." Orders, not a schedule. Orders. The coach rolled away, leaving Clara standing in the dust, her bag at her feet, facing a complete stranger at the wrong ranch in the middle of nowhere. The man took off his hat. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low and cautious, "I'm Eli Turner. I don't know any Samuel Morrison, and I sure as hell didn't send for a bride." Clara stared at him, the world tilting under her feet. The driver's words echoed in her head. "I've got orders." The widow's warning. Some men build their kingdoms on broken promises. The bullet in her pocket. This wasn't a mistake. This was a trap, and she had just been delivered to the middle of it. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind whipping across the empty prairie. Clara stood frozen, the dust from the departing stagecoach settling on her best dress. She was alone, penniless, and stranded with a man who looked at her like she was a ghost who'd just appeared in his yard. Confusion. Clara's voice was sharp, brittle. "Sir, I've traveled 1,000 miles to marry a man, only to be dumped on your doorstep like a sack of unwanted flour. Confusion doesn't quite cover it." The man, Eli Turner, had the decency to look uncomfortable. "No," he admitted, his gaze sweeping toward the mountains where the sun was beginning to set. "I suppose it doesn't." He seemed to be wrestling with something. Finally, he let out a long breath. "Look, it'll be dark soon. The nearest town is a day's ride. You can't stay out here. Come inside. We'll try to sort this out." Every instinct screamed at her to refuse. A proper woman did not enter a strange man's home. But what choice did she have? The prairie offered no shelter. "I have no alternative," she said stiffly. He led the way to a modest log house. It was clean, well kept. A man's home, but not a neglected one. Inside, a fire was crackling in the stone hearth. The main room was simple, functional. A rifle was mounted over the fireplace. The table was set for two. "You said you didn't send for a bride," Clara noted, her eyes fixed on the two plates. "My daughter," he said, his voice softening just slightly. "She's 6. Her name is Lily. She's out with our hired hand, Jake, checking the fences." A child. The presence of a child changed the equation, but only slightly. It didn't explain why her manifest, her entire journey, had been rerouted to this specific, isolated place. Eli made coffee, his movements economical and quiet. He seemed as wary of her as she was of him. "This Samuel Morrison," he said, his back to her. "His ranch is Sunrise Valley?" "Yes, outside a town called Cedar Ridge." Eli shook his head. "Cedar Ridge is 2 days north of here. I know most of the ranchers in these parts. Never heard of a Morrison or a Sunrise Valley ranch." The blood drained from Clara's face. No Sunrise Valley? No Samuel Morrison? Had the entire thing been a lie from the very beginning? Was the letter in her bag a complete fabrication? Her hand went to her pocket, her fingers closing around the heavy bullet. The front door burst open, and a little girl with dark pigtails and wide, curious eyes ran in, stopping short when she saw Clara. Papa, she whispered, hiding behind Eli's legs. Who's that? Lily, this is Miss Whitfield, Eli said gently. She's a guest. She got lost. The little girl peeked out at Clara. Are you lost? She asked, her voice small. In a manner of speaking, yes, Clara managed to say. Papa finds lost things, Lily offered. He always brings them home. The innocent words sent a chill down Clara's spine. Brings them home. Was that what she was? A lost thing brought to this specific home? That night, after a quiet, tense supper, Eli offered her Lily's room. She can bunk with me, he said. You need a proper bed. The room was small and smelled of lavender. A child's treasures were arranged on a shelf. Carved animals, colorful rocks. On the bedside table sat a silver-framed photograph. A beautiful woman with Lily's wide eyes and a gentle smile. Eli's late wife. Clara felt like an intruder in this sanctuary of grief. As she was preparing for bed, she noticed something odd. A small wooden chest at the foot of the bed. It wasn't locked. Curiosity, or maybe a desperate need for answers, got the better of her. She lifted the lid. Inside were women's things. A hairbrush with long, dark strands of hair still tangled in the bristles. A book of poetry. And folded at the bottom, a simple, faded calico dress. It was torn at the sleeve, and there was a dark reddish-brown stain near the hem. It looked like old blood. Clara slammed the chest shut, her heart pounding. The official story was that Eli's wife had died of a fever. But a fever didn't tear a dress. A fever didn't leave bloodstains. Suddenly, the house didn't feel like a shelter. It felt like a cage. The rifle over the fireplace no longer looked decorative. Eli's quiet, watchful demeanor now seemed menacing. Who was this man? And why was she really here? She backed away from the chest, her eyes darting around the room. Her gaze fell on the window. It was a long drop to the ground, but maybe she could make it. She had to get out. She crept to the window and slowly, carefully, began to ease it open. The wood groaned in protest. She froze, listening. Silence. She tried again, and this time it opened. Cool night air washed over her face. Freedom was just a few feet away. She was halfway out the window when a floorboard creaked behind her. I wouldn't do that if I were you. Clara's blood turned to ice. She turned slowly. Eli was standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the lamplight from the main room. He wasn't holding a weapon, but he didn't need to. His presence filled the entire space. A wall of silent threat. The coyotes are bad this time of year, he said, his voice dangerously calm. And the nights get cold. You wouldn't last till morning. His eyes flickered to the wooden chest she'd just closed. A muscle jumped in his jaw. You've been going through my wife's things. It wasn't a question. Your wife, Clara said, her voice trembling but defiant. The one who died of a fever? He took a step into the room. The lamplight caught his face, and for the first time, Clara saw the deep, raw pain in his eyes. It was the look of a man haunted by ghosts. Her name was Margaret, he said, his voice thick with an emotion Clara couldn't decipher. And she didn't die of a fever. He took another step. She was murdered. The confession hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Murdered. Clara's mind reeled. The torn dress, the blood stain. The pieces were slotting together into a picture she didn't want to see. She pressed herself back against the window frame, the cold night air at her back, a cold, silent man in front of her. Who? She whispered, though she wasn't sure she wanted the answer. Eli's stormy eyes locked on hers. The man you were supposed to marry, he said. Samuel Morrison. The name dropped like a stone in the silent room. Samuel Morrison, the man from the letters, the respectable rancher, her intended husband, a murderer. It didn't make sense. None of it did. You're lying, Clara breathed, her mind scrambling for purchase. Why would you say that? You're trying to scare me. I'm trying to keep you alive, Eli countered, his voice raw. Do you have any idea what you were walking into? He gestured toward the chest. Margaret was my wife's sister. They were orphans, just like you. She answered an advertisement, just like you, from a respectable rancher named Samuel Morrison. Clara felt the floor dip beneath her. Margaret was his wife's sister. She went to him, Eli continued, his voice low in pain. Wrote letters for a few months. Said he was charming, successful. Said the ranch was beautiful. Then the letters stopped. A month later, we got word she died. Of fever, they said. Her body was already buried. He paused, the memory twisting his face. My wife, Sarah, she didn't believe it. Margaret was never sick a day in her life. Sarah rode out to Sunrise Valley to find out what happened. She never came back. Clara could barely breathe. What, what happened to your wife? Morrison sent a letter, said she'd had an accident, thrown from her horse. He sent her things back. That chest, that dress is what she was wearing when they found her. His gaze was haunted. A fall from a horse doesn't tear a dress like that. It doesn't leave that kind of stain. This was insane, a conspiracy, a wild story cooked up by a grieving man. But the evidence was right there. The stagecoach driver with his secret orders, the widow's cryptic warning, the bullet, and now this. Why me? Clara asked, her voice a hoarse whisper. Why was I brought here? Because I paid the driver twice what Morrison was paying him, Eli said, the truth finally spilling out. After I found that dress, I started digging. Found out Morrison makes a habit of this. He finds lonely women with no family, no one to ask questions, lures them out here with promises of marriage. But why? Clara demanded. What does he do with them? I don't know, Eli admitted, and the uncertainty was almost worse than a direct accusation. But 3 other women have gone to that ranch in the last 5 years. All mail-order brides, all orphans. None of them were ever heard from again. He had intercepted her. He had rerouted her journey to save her from the same fate. She wasn't his prisoner. She was his protection project. Relief washed over her, so potent it almost buckled her knees. But it was followed by a new, colder wave of fear. Samuel Morrison was still out there, and he was expecting a bride. What happens when I don't show up? She asked. He'll come looking, Eli said grimly. He thinks you were delivered to Cedar Ridge. He'll search there first. That gives us a little time. Time to figure out what to do. He looked at her then, truly looked at her, and the menace was gone, replaced by a weary desperation. I'm sorry I scared you. I didn't know how to tell you. How do you tell a woman that her entire future is a lie, and that the man she promised to marry is a monster? The next morning, the fragile truce held. Clara helped Lily with her braids, the simple domestic act a strange counterpoint to the terrifying reality of their situation. Lily, innocent of the danger swirling around them, chattered happily. Papa says you were lost, but now you're found, she said, looking at Clara in the small mirror. Are you going to stay? The question hung in the air. Staying meant hiding. It meant living in the shadow of a threat that could arrive at any moment. But leaving meant what? Walking back into the trap? Later that day, Clara was helping Eli mend a fence at the far end of the pasture. The work was hard, but it felt good to do something physical, to quiet the racing thoughts in her head. Why didn't you go to the law? She asked, pulling the wire taut while he hammered in a staple. Eli let out a harsh laugh. The law in these parts is a long way away, and Morrison is a rich man. He has friends. It would be my word, the word of a grieving husband with a wild story, against his. They'd say I was crazy. He hammered the last staple with unnecessary force. I tried. The sheriff in Cedar Pass told me to go home and mourn my wife and stop making trouble. So they were truly alone in this. As they worked, Clara noticed a small, dilapidated line shack nestled in a grove of cottonwood trees. It looked like it hadn't been used in years. What's that? She asked. Eli's face tightened. Just an old shack. But he was lying. She could see it in the way he avoided her gaze. Later, when Eli rode out to check on a sick calf, Clara's curiosity, that same instinct that had led her to the chest, pulled her toward the shack. The door was swollen shut, but she managed to force it open. The inside was thick with dust and the smell of disuse. There was a single cot, a broken table, and something else. In the corner, half hidden under a pile of rotting blankets, was a small leather-bound journal. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The handwriting was feminine, elegant. The first entry was dated 2 years ago. My name is Sarah Turner, it began. My sister Margaret is dead, and I believe she was murdered. I have come to Sunrise Valley to find the truth. I will pretend to be a new housekeeper for Mr. Morrison. He must not know who I am. I will record everything I find in this book. It was his wife's journal, Sarah's journal. Clara sank onto the dusty floor, her heart pounding as she read. Sarah had documented everything. Morrison's strange moods, his obsession with his family's legacy, the way he would lock himself in his study for hours. The other women on the ranch, the cooks, the maids, they were all terrified of him. Then came the entry that made Clara's breath catch in her throat. I found it, Sarah wrote, her handwriting shaky. There's a hidden cellar beneath the main house. He goes there at night. I followed him. There are things down there. Small leather bags, each labeled with a name. I saw one with Margaret's name on it. And there are tools, surgical tools. He's not just killing them. He's collecting something from them. A cold sweat broke out on Clara's skin. This was worse than murder. This was the work of a madman. She flipped to the last entry. He knows. I saw it in his eyes today. He knows who I am. I have to get out. I'm leaving this journal in the old line shack where Eli and I used to meet. If I don't make it back, Eli, my love, you must find this. You must stop him. Don't let him hurt anyone else. The entry was unsigned, unfinished. Clara closed the journal, her body shaking. Eli didn't know about this. He thought his wife had been killed trying to escape. He didn't know she had uncovered the truth. He didn't know about the cellar. She had to tell him. She stumbled out of the shack, the journal clutched in her hand, and ran back toward the house. She was halfway across the pasture when she saw them. 2 riders coming up the lane. One of them was wearing a sheriff's badge. The other was tall, well-dressed, with silver hair that glinted in the afternoon sun. He looked exactly like the kind of respectable gentleman a woman would travel 1,000 miles to marry. It was Samuel Morrison, and he had come for his bride. Clara froze in the middle of the field, the damning journal clutched in her hand. Morrison was here. He'd found her, and he'd brought the law with him. Eli came running out of the barn, a pitchfork still in his hand, his face a grim mask. He saw the riders, saw Clara, and then saw the journal she was holding. Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by a new, terrible fear. He'd thought the shack was empty. He had no idea his wife's final words were so close all this time. Miss Whitfield, Morrison called out, his voice smooth and cultured as he dismounted. It was the voice of a gentleman. It was the voice of a monster. I cannot express how worried I've been. He strode toward her, his eyes ignoring Eli completely. They were fixed on Clara, a look of proprietary satisfaction on his face. This was a man reclaiming his property. The sheriff, a burly man with a lazy expression, stayed on his horse. Found her right where the stage driver said, Mr. Morrison? Looks like this fella? He jerked his head toward Eli, decided to keep her for himself. It was a lie, a carefully constructed narrative to paint Eli as a kidnapper and Morrison as a savior. There's been a terrible misunderstanding, Clara said, forcing her voice to remain steady. She tucked the journal behind her back, trying to shield it from view. I'm sure there has been, Morrison said, his smile never reaching his cold blue eyes. But it's all sorted now. You'll come with us. We'll be married by the circuit preacher next week, just as we planned. He was acting as if this was all perfectly normal, as if he hadn't murdered at least 2 women, as if he didn't have a secret cellar full of horrors. I'm not going anywhere, Clara said. Morrison's smile tightened. My dear, you're overwrought. You've had a difficult journey. This man, he finally glanced at Eli with contempt, has clearly filled your head with nonsense. He reached for her arm. Eli stepped between them, the pitchfork held loosely but ready. She said she's not going. The sheriff sighed, shifting in his saddle. Now, Turner, don't make this difficult. The lady has a contract. You're interfering. That's a crime. The only crime here, Clara said, finding her voice, is what Mr. Morrison did to Sarah Turner and her sister. The name hit Morrison like a physical blow. For a split second, the charming mask slipped. Clara saw a flash of pure, cold fury in his eyes before he smoothed his expression back into one of patient concern. Sarah Turner? He said, feigning confusion. Ah, yes, the poor woman who had that tragic riding accident on my property. A terrible business. This man's wife. You see, his grief has clearly made him unstable. He's poisoned you against me with his delusions. He was good. He was dangerously good. He was twisting the truth, making Eli look like a madman. He's not delusional, Clara said, her grip tightening on the journal. And I have proof. She started to bring the journal forward, but before she could, Lily came running out of the house, drawn by the raised voices. Papa! She cried, running straight for Eli. Morrison's eyes landed on the little girl. A strange, calculating look crossed his face. It was a look Clara had never seen before, and it terrified her more than his anger. It was the look of a collector spotting a rare new specimen. A child, Morrison murmured, almost to himself. Hard-working, Protestant preferred, children welcome. He was quoting from the letter. Her letter. Oh, God. It wasn't just about the women. He wasn't just looking for a wife. He wanted a family. A complete, ready-made family to absorb into his horrifying collection. He wanted Clara, and he wanted Lily, too. Sheriff, Morrison said, his voice now steel, this man is holding my fiancée and threatening her with a farm implement. I believe it's time you did your duty. The sheriff slowly swung his leg over his horse. He wasn't lazy. He was confident. He and Morrison had done this before. This was a routine. Clara, take Lily and get in the house, Eli said, his voice a low growl. Lock the door. No, Clara said, planting her feet. She held up the journal. This is Sarah Turner's diary. She wrote down everything you did. The cellar, the bags with the names, everything. The sheriff stopped. He looked from the journal to Morrison. For the first time, he looked uncertain. Morrison, however, just laughed. A short, ugly sound. A diary? My dear, you've been listening to a madman's fantasies. A diary can be faked. A marriage contract, however, is legally binding. He took a step closer. Now give me the book, and let's end this foolishness. You are coming with me. It is your duty. Suddenly, the side door of the barn creaked open. The hired hand, Jake, stepped out. He was holding a shotgun. I reckon the lady's duty is to herself, Jake said, his voice calm and steady. And I reckon you fellas are trespassing. The sheriff's hand hovered over the pistol at his hip. The standoff was escalating. A word, a twitch, and the prairie would be soaked in blood. Morrison's eyes darted between Eli, Jake, and the journal in Clara's hand. He was a man used to getting his way, a man who believed his wealth and influence made him invincible. But he was also a predator, and predators know when the prey is cornered and fighting back. This changes nothing, Morrison snarled, his mask of civility finally gone. He looked directly at Clara, his eyes burning with a possessive fire. You belong to me. I will have what is mine. He turned to the sheriff. We'll be back, and we'll have a warrant and more men. He mounted his horse, gave Clara one last, lingering look that promised retribution, and rode away, the sheriff following reluctantly behind him. They were gone, for now, but they would be back. Clara sagged with relief, the journal nearly slipping from her grasp. Eli rushed to her side, pulling her and Lily into a fierce, protective embrace. He wanted Lily, Clara whispered, her voice choked with horror. The letter said, children welcome. He wanted her. Eli's arms tightened around them. Over her head, his eyes met Jake's. The understanding was clear. This was no longer about just saving Clara. This was about protecting their family. This was about ending Samuel Morrison's reign of terror for good. They had won the skirmish, but the war was coming, and it was coming to Whispering Creek. The silence left by the departing riders was heavy, charged with the promise of their return. They had a few hours, maybe a day at most, before Morrison came back with a warrant and enough men to turn the ranch into a battlefield. We can't stay here, Clara said, looking at Eli. We have to run. Run where? Eli asked, his face grim. He has money, influence. He'll have men watching the roads, the train stations. He'd hunt us to the ends of the earth. No, the fight is here. Jake nodded in agreement. This is our land. We don't run. But how could three people, a rancher, a hired hand, and a woman who'd never fired a gun, stand against a wealthy, powerful madman and a corrupt sheriff? The answer lay in the leather-bound journal still clutched in Clara's hand. He said a diary can be faked, Clara remembered, a desperate idea beginning to form. He's right. It's my word against his. But what if it wasn't just my word? She looked from Eli to Jake. The widow on the stagecoach. She tried to warn me. She gave me a bullet. She knew something. The driver, too, Eli added. He admitted he was following orders. If we could get them to talk. They work for Morrison, Jake pointed out. They're not going to turn on him. Not unless they have a better offer, Clara said, or unless they're more scared of us than they are of him. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but it was the only one they had. They needed allies. They needed proof that couldn't be dismissed as the ravings of a grieving husband. Jake, Eli said, his mind already working, ride to the Henderson place. Tell them what's happening. Tell them to spread the word, quietly. We need every neighbor we can trust to be ready. And you, Jake asked. Clara and I are going hunting, Eli said, his eyes meeting hers. We're going to find that stagecoach driver. They rode hard, pushing the horses faster than was safe. They found the stagecoach at the same lonely trading post where Clara's journey had been interrupted. The driver was inside, drinking whiskey with the weaselly proprietor. They weren't expecting to see Eli and Clara again. The shock on their faces was all the confirmation they needed. Eli didn't waste time with pleasantries. He slammed Sarah's journal down on the table between them. Samuel Morrison murdered my wife, he said, his voice low and cold as steel. And you two helped him lure another woman into his trap. You're accessories to murder. Now you can either ride with me to the federal marshal 2 towns over and tell him everything you know, or you can take your chances with Morrison when he finds out you couldn't keep your mouth shut. The driver paled. The proprietor started sweating. They were small men, bullies and cowards, caught between a rock and a hard place. Morrison pays well, the proprietor stammered. The federal government pays with a hangman's noose, Clara said, her voice sharp. She slid the bullet the widow had given her onto the table. This was a warning. I think it's time you heeded it. It was the threat, more than the appeal to justice, that broke them. By the time they left the trading post, they had 2 terrified, reluctant witnesses who had agreed to testify against Morrison. They rode back to the ranch under the cover of darkness. 2 new riders in their party. But Clara knew it still wasn't enough. A jury might believe 2 coerced witnesses, or they might not. They needed something undeniable. They needed to get into that cellar. Back at the ranch, Jake had returned. The news was good. The neighbors were rallying. They didn't trust Morrison, and they respected Eli. They would stand with him. Men were already taking up positions in the hills around the ranch, creating a perimeter. Morrison would not find it so easy to return. He'll expect us to fortify the house, Eli said, looking at the floor plans of Morrison's mansion that his wife had sketched in the back of her journal. He won't expect us to attack. The plan was audacious. It was insane. It was perfect. While the neighbors guarded Whispering Creek, a small party would ride to Sunrise Valley, not to fight, but to find that cellar. Eli, Clara, and Jake would go, along with the stagecoach driver, who knew the layout of the ranch. Their goal, get in, get the evidence, and get out. It's a suicide mission, Jake said. It's our only chance, Clara replied. They rode through the night, a small band of ghosts moving across the prairie. The driver led them to a service entrance at the back of the sprawling mansion, used by delivery wagons. The lock was old and Jake made short work of it. The house was dark and silent. Morrison was likely gathering his men, preparing for his assault on Whispering Creek in the morning. He would never dream they would be bold enough to enter the lion's den. Sarah's journal guided them through the darkened halls, past portraits of Morrison's ancestors who stared down with cold, dead eyes. They found the study, just as she'd described, and behind a heavy bookcase, they found the hidden door. The air that wafted up from the opening was cold and smelled of dust and chemicals. And something else. Something sweet and rotten, like decay. Eli lit a lantern, the flickering light casting long, dancing shadows on the stone walls as they descended the narrow staircase. The cellar was exactly as Sarah had described. It was a laboratory of horrors. Shelves lined the walls, filled with jars and strange, gleaming instruments. and on a long wooden table, there they were, a row of small leather satchels. Each one had a woman's name elegantly tooled into the flap. Margaret, Eleanor, Anne. And at the end of the row, a new empty satchel with the name Clara already inscribed on it. Clara felt a wave of nausea, her bag waiting for her. Eli, his face pale but resolute, picked up the satchel marked Margaret. His hands were shaking as he opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was not a lock of hair or piece of jewelry. It was a human heart, perfectly preserved in a glass jar filled with a clear, yellowish liquid. A scream built in Clara's throat, but she choked it down. They looked in the next bag, and the next. Each one held the same gruesome trophy. Samuel Morrison wasn't just a murderer. He was a collector of hearts, a monster playing God, preserving the life force of the women he lured to his home. He wasn't building a family. He was building a museum of the dead. "We have what we came for," Eli said, his voice a hoarse whisper. He carefully placed Margaret's satchel and Clara's empty one into a larger bag. "Let's go." But as they turned to leave, a floorboard creaked above them. They weren't alone in the house. They extinguished the lantern, plunging the cellar into absolute darkness. Footsteps echoed from the study above. Slow, deliberate footsteps. Then a voice. Morrison's voice. "I know you're down there." He hadn't gone to gather his men. He had anticipated their move. He had set a trap of his own. "Did you find my collection?" he called down, his voice laced with a mad pride. "Beautiful, aren't they? A family should be kept together. Forever." The door at the top of the stairs slammed shut. The heavy bolt slid into place. They were trapped in a tomb, with a monster waiting for them on the other side. The darkness in the cellar was absolute, a thick, suffocating blanket that swallowed every sound. They were trapped. The air grew heavy, stale with the smell of death and preserving chemicals. Panic was a living thing, clawing at the edges of Clara's composure. "He knew," Jake whispered, his voice tight with tension. "He played us." "He underestimated us," Eli countered, his voice steady in the blackness. "Sarah wrote about a second passage, an old bootlegger's tunnel that connects to the ice house." He fumbled in the dark, relighting the lantern. The small flame pushed back the shadows, revealing their terrified faces. The stagecoach driver was muttering prayers, his nerve completely gone. Guided by the frantic sketches in the journal, they found it. A section of the stone wall that looked solid but wasn't. It took all of Eli and Jake's strength to push it open, revealing a narrow, dark tunnel. "Go!" Eli urged, pushing Clara toward the opening. "Get the evidence to the marshal. Jake and I will hold him off." "No," Clara said, her voice fierce. "We leave together or not at all." There was no time to argue. They scrambled into the tunnel, pulling the terrified driver with them, and slid the stone back into place just as they heard Morrison begin to smash at the main cellar door with an axe. The tunnel was cramped and slick with damp, but it led them, as Sarah had promised, to the small, sod-roofed ice house behind the main mansion. They burst out into the pre-dawn light, gasping for fresh air, but their relief was short-lived. From the main house, a shout went up. They'd been spotted. "Run for the horses!" Eli yelled. They sprinted across the manicured lawn, the sound of gunshots cracking the morning air behind them. A bullet whizzed past Clara's head, so close she felt its heat. They reached the trees where they'd hidden their mounts, leaping into the saddles as Morrison's hired guns poured out of the house. It was a desperate race across the open prairie. They were outnumbered, riding for their lives, with the most gruesome evidence imaginable in their saddlebags. They rode hard, leaning low, the wind screaming in their ears. They were almost to the safety of the hills surrounding Whispering Creek when it happened. The stagecoach driver, riding beside Clara, cried out and slumped forward, a dark stain spreading across his back. He clung to the saddle for a few more seconds before tumbling to the ground, another victim of Samuel Morrison. There was no time to stop. They galloped on, the riders behind them closing the distance. They reached the first line of hills where their neighbors were waiting. A volley of rifle fire erupted from the rocks, providing covering fire and forcing Morrison's men to pull back. They were safe, for the moment. They stumbled back to the ranch house, exhausted, grief-stricken, but triumphant. They had the proof, the jars, the satchels, the undeniable, horrific truth of what Samuel Morrison was. The neighbors gathered around, their faces grim and determined as Eli revealed the contents of the saddlebags. A wave of revulsion and anger rippled through the crowd. This wasn't about a land dispute or a runaway bride anymore. This was about cleansing the evil that had taken root in their community. "The federal marshal is a day's ride from here," one of the ranchers said. "But Morrison won't wait that long. He'll attack before then. He can't let us get this evidence out." He was right. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the valley, a lookout spotted them. A small army, at least 20 men, riding under Morrison's banner. They were surrounding the ranch, preparing for a final siege. The women and children, including Lily, were hurried down into the ranch's small storm cellar. "You be brave, little bird," Eli told his daughter, his voice thick with emotion. "Mama Clara and I will be right here." He called her Mama Clara. It was the first time. In the face of death, the truth of their new family was finally spoken aloud. Clara kissed Lily's forehead. "I love you," she whispered. "Now go, and don't be scared." She emerged from the cellar and took her place beside Eli at the window, a rifle in her hands. He had shown her how to use it, and while her hands were shaking, her resolve was firm. She had come to this land seeking a home, and she would fight to the death to protect it. The night was long and filled with terror. Morrison's men attacked in waves, their gunshots lighting up the darkness. The small band of ranchers fought back with the quiet courage of people defending their homes. Clara fired and reloaded, the smell of gunpowder sharp in her nostrils. She was no longer the frightened orphan from Missouri. She was a woman of the frontier, forged in fire and fear, fighting for her family. The final assault came at dawn. Morrison, enraged and desperate, led the charge himself, his face a mask of insane fury. He made it to the porch, his eyes wild, screaming Clara's name. Eli met him there. The two men crashed together in a brutal, desperate fight. It wasn't about land or contracts anymore. It was a fight between a man who cherished hearts and a monster who collected them. Clara aimed her rifle, but she couldn't get a clear shot. One of Morrison's men was charging her, and she had to turn to defend herself. She fired, and the man went down. When she looked back, Eli was on the ground, and Morrison was standing over him, a hunting knife raised high. "She is mine!" Morrison shrieked. A single gunshot echoed across the yard. Morrison froze. A look of surprise crossed his face. He looked down at the red blossom spreading across his chest. Then he collapsed, falling beside the man he'd been trying to kill. Clara stared, her rifle still raised. But she hadn't fired. Standing in the doorway of the barn, smoke curling from the barrel of his old shotgun, was Jake. "Reckon he won't be bothering folks no more," the old hired hand said calmly. It was over. The federal marshal arrived a day later, led by the widow from the stagecoach, who, it turned out, was a Pinkerton agent hired by the families of Morrison's other victims. The evidence from the cellar, combined with the testimony of the surviving witnesses, painted a clear picture. The story of Samuel Morrison, the wealthy rancher and secret serial killer, became a legend of the West, a cautionary tale whispered around campfires. Sunrise Valley Ranch was burned to the ground. No one wanted to live with the ghosts that haunted that place. Life at Whispering Creek returned to a new kind of normal. A few months later, with the neighbors gathered as witnesses, Clara Whitfield married Eli Turner. Lily was the flower girl, scattering wildflower petals with joyful abandon. Clara never forgot the journey that brought her there, the mistaken delivery, the terror, the fight for her life. She had been delivered to the wrong ranch, but it had turned out to be exactly the right place. She had been sent to a monster but had found a hero. She had lost a future she thought she wanted, but had gained a love she never could have imagined. Standing on the porch of her home, her husband's arm around her, her daughter laughing in the yard, Clara finally understood the widow's warning. The frontier takes, but it also gives. It had taken her innocence, but it had given her a family. It had taken her fear, and it had given her a strength she never knew she possessed. She had found her home, and this time, it was forever. If you enjoyed this story of survival and justice on the frontier, do me a favor and murder that subscribe button. and ring the notification bell so you don't miss the next dark tale. Let me know in the comments below. What do you think was the single bravest thing Clara did on her journey? Thanks for watching.